Hey everyone, Arthur here. We're back with the Switch Hidden Gems. Sorry it's been a while, I was covering the 360 with urgency as the marketplace was about to close. Then I got sick, then I got robbed. I had to deal with the police and stuff, that took away a lot of time. But we're back to calmer times now. YouTube tells me that 74% of viewers are not subscribed to the channel. So if you already know you will be getting some quality content here, I'd really appreciate if you could subscribe. We're almost at the 10k mark and I want to run something by you before doing it. What do you guys think of me evolving this series and changing its name to Recent Hidden Gems or Modern Hidden Gems? Not sure yet. It would not change the content in any meaningful way for you guys, as most games already come out on Switch these days, at least when it comes to hidden gems on home consoles, and I would still keep the Switch series going to cover physicals like today or exclusives as well. But this way I could try attracting a wider audience, so let me know what you think down in the comments. Okay, now for the topic at hand. When it comes to Switch physicals, one thing that has helped me immensely is the Nintendo Switch Physical Collectors Facebook group, where pretty much anything Switch related is posted and I find out or remember about a lot of games. People looking to buy or sell will also find it very useful. So do check that out and let's go, let's see a whole bunch of cool lesser known Switch games found in physical version that I want to share with you guys. Welcome to the channel, this is From the Void. Let's start this time with a somewhat underrated gem called Ultra Age. I saw the reviews on the 7 range and went in not expecting much from Ultra Age and was pleasantly surprised. This is an action hack and slash in third person and it truly excels on the hacking and slashing. The positives really outweigh the negatives. It even manages to not feel mindless, which is a common pitfall for this kind of game. It does so by adding some pretty neat combos, abilities and cool effects with significant gameplay implications to all the different blades which you can change between seamlessly. Seriously, they worked really hard on the combat here and it shows. We have our typical weapon affinity, like the claymore being effective against mechanical enemies and the katana against organic ones, but it goes well beyond that, like the lightning blade allowing for some crowd control by electrocuting enemies on a radius. You can later use range attacks too. There is a grappling hook for both traversal. This is the main cool thing about exploration, allowing for some pretty interesting verticality. You'll need to look up to find secrets, which is cool, and the grapple mechanic is also used in combat to pull in enemies or launch yourself into them. Then they also had a great weapon durability idea here. Each weapon you can see down there has a number beside it, which means basically how many copies, I guess, you have of each weapon. Once durability depletes, you can use a final powerful attack before it breaks, but unless the number goes to 0, you can still use that weapon. It's just a clever way to avoid allowing the players to use one weapon only the whole game, while also introducing an interesting way to do a special move. Outside of battle, you collect crystals to improve your stuff, which is neat, but everything takes a backseat to the combat, which is straight up bombastic. Other drawbacks are the story and voiceover, which are lackluster, not terrible. The Switch version will suffer with somewhat downgraded graphics, but pretty great for Switch standards, especially during the battles. Physically, it's also on PlayStation 4, and you have two options for Switch: the less expensive Japanese release, which also counts with English options, and the limited run version. This was one of those distro limited run releases which got less advertisement, but it's also easier to find and not too expensive at this point. Moving on to a great lesser known isometric action roguelike called Metallic Child. Okay, this is pretty excellent. The presentation here is top-notch, especially the visual and sound effects that accompany all the getting of new stuff and the upgrades and core installations and all that. All very flashy and chunky sounding, which enhances the dopamine effect of getting something new. The action here is also top-notch. I really like how it's not too fast or too slow, so decision making feels very meaningful. Each possible weapon you can equip changes the playstyle significantly, even deciding if you can dodge or defend, and the specials are pretty cool too, with each weapon having different grabs, different powerful attacks, and different takedowns, which are more rare but also more satisfying when you activate them. The rogue stuff is great here, lots to unlock, and compared to most other rogue games, this is rather long, not only because each run goes deep with several levels and several bosses per stage, but also because there is a big amount of stages too. Excellent game, Metallic Child, I love it. It got only a Asian physical release, at least so far, and it's sold out from PlayAsia, so you'll likely have to import it from eBay or something like that, but it's not too expensive and totally worth it. And this version has English support, so don't worry. Next is a game I never hear people talking about, and that's just not right, because this is awesome. Galak-Z The Void. Okay, this is a rare kind of game. It may look like a shoot 'em up, but it's more like a shooter adventure game. You have full freedom to explore the stages and clear missions. During the adventure you can upgrade your ship with a lot of different parts. Pretty deep customization aspect here. The story is well presented with great voiceover. The moment-to-moment gameplay is also excellent. It looks like it, but it's not a twin-stick shooter. It instead goes for a momentum-based control scheme where ZR is gas and ZL is reverse. So to stop you press both. It's a hard control scheme to get, but feels great once you do, and also feels believable, simulating better how driving a ship in space would feel. I love this, great gameplay. The gameplay loop has a little bit of roguelike aspects, but it doesn't completely lose the predetermined structure of stages. There is only a little bit of random aspects like the exact location of key items, enemies and ship improvements, while the story, missions, general locations like asteroids, types of hazards, and available enemies are predetermined. The progression also has a bit of a rogue nature. When dying, you don't go necessarily to the beginning of the game, but to the beginning of a chapter. You need to clear the entire chapter without dying to save. It's kinda brutal because the game is hard, but not as hard as many roguelikes out there. I liked the entire thing, no issues for me in Galak-Z, definitely a hidden gem here, and it's available physically for the Switch and PlayStation 4 in a rather interesting compilation from 17 bits, which is a total must grab, and I'll continue to cover in 2 seconds. Meet you there. And the other wonderful game on this must-have collection from 17 bits is the way underappreciated Schools of the Shogun. Let's go! What a remarkable game. This is a classic indie for a reason, and even though it achieved some cult classic status, it's way less than it deserves. The setting here is hilarious, and so are the conversations and sounds the units make. It goes like this. General Akamoto was about to achieve the high status of Shogun, which is the highest military position, but then gets betrayed by one of his own lieutenants. Akamoto then arrives in the land of the dead, but refuses to obey any orders and starts a skeleton riot against the entire afterlife system. You soon even run across Kurokawa, the traitorous lieutenant, who died soon after taking Akamoto's life by tripping and falling on a spearhead. But Kurokawa has taken Akamoto's identity and all his valor here in the afterlife. So now it's revenge time against Kurokawa and the whole being dead situation. Battles, as you can see, are turn-based strategy style, but this game stands apart among other strategy games a lot. The main aspect introduced, which is unique to this game, is that after defeating an enemy, you can freaking eat their skulls to replenish life, as well as increase max HP, and after the same unit eats 3 skulls, skills in a level, they become demonic and gain an extra action per turn, which is great. This system is amazing and the enemies can also make use of it, so it adds a real fun extra layer to the strategy. There is more too. Units can haunt buildings and rice paddies, with which you can then recruit more units mid-battle. Pretty cool new dynamic there as well. So yeah, Schools of the Shogun is a brilliant game. It's fast-paced and easy to play, with not a single complicated aspect about it that even non-strategy fans can enjoy. This Bone-a-Fide edition contains the DLC in the cartridge, and this is the only physical made of the game, either here on Switch or on the PlayStation 4. This next one is so good, you guys. Deserves so much more recognition than it got. This is République. Wow, this blew me away. What a great game. République is a third-person stealth adventure, and emphasis on third-person there. This is literally a third-person view game, meaning that you control the protagonist directly, but can only see her through the lens of the many cameras that your hacker guy gained access to in order to help her. This is so cool, I love it. It creates this dissonance where you feel like you could lose track of her at any time, especially in the beginning where she's almost defenseless. It's pretty nerve-wracking in a great way. So you're controlling her, she can do stuff like pickpocketing, opening things, grabbing items, and using a few non-lethal weapons too, which are limited so you can't abuse them. And on top of that, you can also hack into the computers and many other electronic things, like you can lock doors from a distance, which can use to lock a guard in for a time, for instance. The story is awesome, fighting collectibles is a joy, there's a lot of attention to detail here, it's remarkable. I love this game, liked it way more than I initially expected. The physical version for Switch is the Anniversary Edition, which includes all episodes as this was released in parts originally, and it counts with a cool manual too. We have here a Game Freak game that no one knows about and an easy game to misunderstand too. Big highlight here, GIGA Wrecker Alt. Okay, this is totally one of a kind and it's flawed, but definitely worth a play for the right person. GIGA Wrecker has a lot going on for it. It's a platformer mostly, a puzzler secondly, a action game thirdly, and a Metroidvania last. Just a tiny bit of Metroidvania here, with closed off sections and backtracking required once you gain the correct abilities. Now, the main gimmick of the game comes from the fact that the protagonist girl is a kind of a cyborg, capable of manipulating nanomachines inside destructible objects, and by doing so she can gather the debris around her arm, forming a huge ball of stuff which can then manipulate in many different ways, like forming blocks, using as a sword, shifting into a spear you can stick to walls and use as an extra platform, and more. Now here's the catch, and what makes the game much more interesting but also imperfect and potentially frustrating. Everything is physics based here, therefore much more unstable than you would expect. Blocks will tilt into awkward diagonal positions, you sometimes clip through them depending on the movement of your character. The weights of things is a big concern by design, which leads to things falling unintentionally and also makes results of your actions much harder to predict. Sometimes getting things right takes a lot of trial and error, but many players may also find this whole thing very enjoyable because you can often find solutions to the puzzles that clearly even the developers overlooked. So yeah, not for everyone this game, but for an open-minded player it may be a treat, because the game keeps improving itself for a long time, introducing new ideas, new enemies, creative boss fights, and even sections where you control another character with a gun instead of the mechanical arm. I had a love-hate relationship with this game, but evolved much more into the side of love than hate. Really happy I found this one, worth a shot for sure if you're not easily enraged by frustration in games. This is one of the lesser known games from Game Freak for sure, and from Limited Run, who made the physical exclusively, and it's kinda cheap among limited run games, at least for now. I could not stop playing this next one, I kid you not. This is Raging Loop. This is something else. I got and I'm still obsessed with Raging Loop. But let's get the potentially deal breaker out of the way first. This is a visual novel, alright? That said, this is one of the best out there in my opinion. What a remarkable experience. Nothing like this anywhere. So please, ignore the low score from Nintendo Life. Seriously, this one I gotta mention. He gave it a 5 out of 10, but gave himself away in the end really clearly. Check this out. In the conclusion he says, and I quote, "Raging Loop is a promisingly creepy title, yada yada, that fails to deliver thanks to sluggish pace and lack of meaningful choices." And here is the great part. Fans of visual novels will no doubt get something out of this, but the rest of us will lose patience early on. The rest of us. That's first person plural, he's including himself in that, so he is not a fan of visual novels. Good grief. Is that someone you wanna hear about visual novels? I don't think so. So I beg of you, ignore that review. Anyways, Raging Loop is absolutely great. It brings a deeply immersive story about a guy who gets lost in a bike trip and ends up in a remote Japanese countryside village. Early on you discovered that this is like a satellite town of a nearby city where the outcasts are sent. You get trapped here and this place is creepy as shit. Holy hell. There's a cult-like situation going on here. You'll never know who to trust. You begin not being sure about what's real and what's not, and will be blown away by the insane amount of revelations this has in store. There is no escaping that this is for a person who likes to read, cause it's a pure visual novel not presenting any kind of real gameplay. Unlike the nonary games with puzzles, choices do exist but they are infrequent and only there to mark important story parts. Your choices are totally predetermined by the story itself and not the other way around. But it's not like this could have been a book instead. You would lose a lot, the way you can look back and keep track of your previous paths, the many times beautiful drawings, and especially the soundtrack, which is great, all make a world of difference, adding so much to an already unforgettable story and cast of characters. They will live with you, man, I'm telling you, all of them. If you like a good creepy story, this delivers and then some. Look it up online, it's easy to find many who love this dearly. And do go for all the endings, cause it's totally worth it. This next one is hard to understand why it isn't much more well known. Sunblaze. This is simple to explain. It's a precision platformer very similar to Celeste, and in terms of the precision platforming gameplay, it's a 10 out of 10. The controls are tight, you have a dash which you can use in midair, then you need to touch ground to use it again. This is represented by her changing colors, just like Celeste. You also have a double jump, you can hang from pipes, and most other ideas come from the different kinds of platforms. There's a big amount of creative ones in Sunblaze. Level design is simply masterful here, soundtrack is excellent, I love the pixel art too, story is enjoyable. So yeah, do you like your 2D platformers to be a major challenge? If that would be a yes, Sunblaze is a must get. This only came out physically for the Switch and in Asia only too, so it's not very well known physically, and your best option may be to import it from Asian retailers such as Play Asia. Moving on to a compilation of excellent strategy games inexplicably obscure, Tiny Metal Ultimate. This one includes two games, Tiny Metal and Tiny Metal Full Metal Rumble, along with its DLC. They are very similar and a continuation of each other, so I'm covering both together. These are strategy games in the same vein of Advance Wars, and for all the hype there was a few years back with the Advance Wars revival, as well as similar games coming out like Wargroove, this series passed by largely unnoticed, and I don't understand why. Reviews are kind of wide-ranging for these, but I certainly agree to the high scores on the 9 range for both games. These are excellent, hard to stop playing. Great ideas, easy to understand, and full of stuff to pay attention to that will affect your decision making. I love the lock-on system that allows units to aim on a target, but only attack once another unit initiates combat against the same enemy, thus allowing the first unit to attack without suffering a counter. The dynamic around capturing buildings is also interesting. There are units that can carry infantry along. The effectiveness of bullets against humans and missiles against mechanical units is super simple but pretty cool because it makes all units invaluable and it requires no explanation. I also like the character drawings and the soundtrack. Again, Tiny Metal Ultimate is a compilation of both games plus the DLC in the cartridge and is a physical exclusive to the Switch and from limited run too. It's not too expensive yet, but it's getting there, indicating that people are coming around to discover this, so you may want to grab it sooner rather than later. Moving on to a game I believe deserves much more of a highlight. This is a top-notch Metroidvania right here. Pronty. Alright, this is great. It does the Hollow Knight thing of being kinda cute and kinda creepy at the same time, which is cool, and it draws more inspiration from that game, but it never feels like a ripoff in the slightest. I think that needs to be said about Metroidvanias these days, so just to be clear, this is totally its own thing. It's in water, so controls are completely different, and a more unusual kind of Metroidvania which I enjoy. The combat is a major highlight, with Pronty not being the one who attacks at all. You have a metallic eel companion who does the slashing like a sword, and you can command it like a twin stick shooter and then order it to slash with ZR. The eel can be summoned to circle around Pronty, serving as a temporary deflector against projectiles, as well as fending off against enemies. The control scheme is hard to get, will require some getting used to, but totally worth it and refreshing. The world of Pronty is awesome, dystopian and creepy in all the right ways, including the enemies, which are all weird mutations of sea creatures and rubbish, really unsettling in a strange way. Graphics are great, secrets are plentiful, so yeah, this is awesome, a great and unique Metroidvania here, very much worth including in your list and grabbing it physically, as it got a limited run release, but it's one of those less glamorous distro releases from them. It's a rare PAL only release from limited run, but this also means that it probably got a bigger print run, so it's likely not as rare as many limited run games. Next, we got a couple of Taiko no Tatsujin RPGs here, heck yeah. This is Taiko no Tatsujin Rhythmic Adventure Pack. This is a very famous series in Japan, and increasingly so in the West nowadays too. Despite that, I believe that the two Rhythmic adventure games are still unknown, meaning most may not be aware that there exists Taiko no Tatsujin RPGs out there, and they're quite great. Both games evoke a lot of Pokemon for me, not only because of the creature recruiting and customizing, but outside of battle too. You will be exploring towns and locations in many different time periods, with a lot of exposition of Japanese culture, which is pretty cool. The story is crazy and characters are a lot of fun, with a lot of humor, but the main draw of the games are the rhythm cross RPG battles. You don't directly control the attacks of your party members, instead keeping combos up by correctly hitting notes decides whether you, the opponent, or both will attack and how frequently. The first game features random encounters, while the second shows the enemies on the area so that you can avoid them if you want, which is much appreciated. The sequel is the better game for sure. They also don't overstay their welcome, each lasting about 7 hours or so. So yeah, these are totally fun and a great way to decide if you want to get into the series or not. Physically, you have a lot of options for these games. The pack with both games got a Japanese release, which has full English support. That's the one I have. And it also got an Asian release with the cover fully in English, which is even better probably. And PAL regions got each game released separately too. Moving on to another strangely obscure game, Elliot Quest. Okay, You just heard one of the songs in this game's soundtrack, and there is no denying, Elliot Quest takes super heavy inspiration on Zelda, especially Zelda 2. It features many similar ideas and game structures like the world map with lots to discover, the 2D gameplay focused on the action, and even the leveling up system with stats allocations, which makes a huge difference. It does everything right, modernizing all the right things, especially removing the brutal punishment from dying, which made Zelda 2 infamous. So yeah, the game is excellent in every single perspective. The sense of adventure is great, exploration is highly incentivized, and the 2D gameplay is spot on with a focus on the bow as the main weapon, which is refreshing. A little bit of a Kid Icarus inspiration here too. The main issue though is that it doesn't explain a few things, which will probably make most players get stuck a few times, but that's it. Everything else is excellent. It's a shame this game didn't get review scores above 7s. It got very few review scores too, which made it sink into obscurity. This deserved way better. Excellent game here, Elliot Quest. Physically, this is available on the Nicalis store, and one cool thing about the physical is that there is a reversible cover that emulates the Adventure of Link Gold cartridge for the NES. Pretty awesome. I love this kind of thing. Moving on to a classic originally released on the Sega Saturn, now remastered for modern consoles, Powerslave Exhumed. This is such a great first-person shooter. Of all Doom-style games I've ever played, it is one of the best for sure. The gameplay is long, with many stages, where you freely choose where to explore, with some amount of Metroidvania back and forth, if you can believe it, when you get new skills like high jumping, floating down, breathing underwater, and much more. There is a lot of interesting exploration in this game, I love it. The ancient Egyptian theme is awesome, weirdly fitting to a first-person shooter, a great surprise. The beginning is a little too easy, with the enemies not being too challenging, but things pick up. This also brings me some Turok vibes with the amount of platforming in first person. Weapons are creative and unusual, with both some heavy power and some mystical stuff from the ancient civilization, which is pretty cool. I love this, great game, couldn't stop playing it. This is definitely among the lesser known limited run releases, so not too expensive yet. Next, two very unusual games in a compilation called ExZeus Complete Edition. These are very simple but fun, unusual and obscure. ExZeus 1 and 2 are very arcadey on-rail shoot-em-ups, but I find the kind of over-the-shoulder third-person view completely refreshing and lots of fun. Both games have a lot of change-ups to the gameplay, like sections where you ride vehicles, either still shooting or switching to only avoid obstacles, sections on foot, and the insane boss fights, which are my favorite parts. Be aware though that these are arcade games at heart, so difficulty is really high, failing is almost guaranteed for beginners, and the games are short, compensating for the high challenge. Physicals came out on retail on US regions only, as far as I know, for Switch and PlayStation 4. Up next is a severely overlooked action RPG gem from a famous series, Shining Resonance Refrain. The Shining series is much better known for their absolutely excellent strategy RPG entries rather than the offshoot action RPG ones like this. And while it's true that Resonance never achieves the level of greatness of the Shining Force games of yesterday, I definitely see this as an underrated title, at least a little bit. I agree to some issues most reviewers point out, mainly in the lackluster story, which is a big drawback, but I do like the characters and their interactions. The world of Resonance and the abundance of dragons in this game are pretty awesome, but you know, dragons are a soft spot of mine. But even ignoring that, other than the story and a few things that may end up even being a major plus depending on your preferences, like the dating sim aspect here, everything else is pretty great. So I would once again agree more to the Japanese reviewers who gave this scores on the 8 range, like Famitsu, Yadobashi and Hatena. This is a very competent action RPG. It will deliver a satisfying gameplay with all the predictable stuff, stuff like customization of your abilities, gear, and a lot more like tuning of your aspects, which is like a materia system, basic, uncreative, but effective, and by developing relationships, you can improve the bonds between characters, which also affects the gameplay. On top of all that, each character can be controlled in battle, and their combat styles are widely different, including main guy here who can transform into a dragon, which is always welcome in my book. So all things considered, the game doesn't reinvent much at all, it surely lacks on originality, but does all the things very well, resulting in a fun time if you like the mix of things here. Soundtrack is beyond excellent, by the way, complementing well the musical inclination of the game, with each character having a weapon which doubles as a musical instrument. Alright, next we move to the bonus section. Here I include a few more games based on the stuff I've been playing that go well beyond the 18 on the main section and that I'd like to feature but they don't really fit the list. The first bonus title here, the lovely SCHiM. This is a treat. I love the graphics and the gameplay idea. You control a little shadow frog creature of some kind that can only jump where there is a shadow. You can rotate a camera to find your route, and that's the main gameplay idea in the game, finding routes, but frequently it introduces some cool new mechanisms, usually around how you can interact with objects you are under, like dropping or lifting a traffic fence or a forklifter, and thus changing the shadow positions so you can reach new locations. Many stages have hidden objects to find as an extra layer. So yeah, solid game here, a nice distraction for when you don't want to play anything complicated, and relax with beautiful graphics and very enjoyable music. This will get a physical soon from IM 8-bit, so keep an eye out for that. Another one also coming out physically soon, but this one is not hidden at all. We're of course talking about Castlevania Dominus Collection. I've been a big fan of the DS Castlevania releases, all of them, I love them all. Portrait of Ruin is my favorite, with how you can change between two characters at any time, and all the weapons and abilities you can learn for both of them, pretty cool. Order of Ecclesia is another must play in my opinion. What a gorgeous game with a different take. It goes back to a kind of a stage-based structure, with missions to tackle, and doing them correctly will determine what kind of ending you'll get, so it's a meaningful difference and a fresh new take on the series. Great game. And Dawn of Sorrow is also excellent, a direct continuation of the GBA entry Aria of Sorrow, bringing a similar gameplay focused on the soul collecting with widely different gameplay effects. And that's the easy and obvious part. All the games are excellent, but is the port good or not? Yes it is, absolutely, with a few very minor caveats, but even then the Switch is definitely the best option out of all modern platforms, because the games here are presented very much in their original format, with the two screens always visible, and since there is an extra space left, they fill that in with another screen, call it a third screen, with character information, equipment, or the map always visible. This is a pretty great setup. As for touchscreen stuff, all three games are not too heavy on them to begin with. Dawn of Sorrow is the one that uses it the most, with some obstacles having to be removed with the touch mechanism and the whole magical seal to open doors and stuff. And for that, on Switch you have two options. There is a built-in button translation by holding ZR and moving the cursor around, which doesn't feel great, but it's functional enough. And the much better option is the handheld mode, with the actual touchscreen, which makes it pretty much exactly the same as on the DS. On Steam you can also use the mouse, which is another good option, but the Switch in handheld is even better in my opinion. Since these games are low pixel count, they look better on the smaller screen, so this is perfect in my opinion. And to top things off, the collection also includes another game and its remastered version, and it's a rather obscure Castlevania entry called Haunted Castle, which came out in arcades originally. So as arcade games go, the original version is too hard, made to get all the quarters from arcade customers, but the revisited edition is reworked to feel much more fair and quite a joy to play. I loved it. It's not too easy or too hard, it goes for an old school style, stages are varied, boss fights are awesome. So yeah, another great game here, which makes this a great collection, guys. And Limited Run is bringing it physically in the same style of the GBA collection, with 3 covers to pick from and probably a lot of collector edition options as well. I'll be grabbing that for sure. Another entirely wholesome game I've been playing is Ikonei Island, an Earthlock adventure. That subtitle there is what attracted me to this game the most. This is under the Earthlock franchise, which will be getting a sequel soon, and that's a pretty cool turn-based RPG. Ikonei Island, however, is rather different. This is an action-adventure with a whole lot of extra things like crafting, monster taming, and farming mechanisms as well. Those are simple enough and not the focus, which totally lies on the action-adventuring itself, but it makes it so that there are lots of layers in this game. Quite impressive. You have to save the island by activating shrines, which will require you to find specific items. The exploration factor is big in this game. You may even go too far and meet monsters way out of your league. You can also control the creatures you tame, build structures to reach new places, and produce items. It's a deep game for sure, with lots to do and dozens of hours of wholesome entertainment. Next is FROGUE. This is real cool. It's a very unusual turn-based action. Yeah, not turn-based RPG, turn-based action roguelike with the same mechanisms found in another game I love called Dandara. Basically, you don't move freely. Instead, you have to launch yourself from wall to wall, or ceilings or floors, it's all the same here. But where Dandara's combat is all about shooting, in FROGUE you use a sword, so launching yourself towards an enemy will damage them, which is tricky to do because they will shoot you. So many times the better way is to throw your sword, but then it stays there, so you gotta get it back. You can even grab it and then hit the enemy in the same movement. It's pretty cool, and all this creates a pretty cool dynamic in this game because it works in a turn-based mechanism. Once you commit to an action, the enemies will also act. I found it a joy to play. This is a roguelike game, so stages are randomized with some different boss fights and upgrades, and dying will push you back to the beginning. It's definitely for roguelike fans, but if you're one, this is a fantastic game. FROGUE, try it out. Next is certainly the lowlight in today's list, Mars 2120. This is a Metroidvania that does a lot right. It counts with some impressive cinematic moments with camera change-ups, which is cool, lots of interesting power-ups, cool map to explore, but it's all somewhat hampered by one major problem. The whole game is poorly balanced, especially when it comes to the enemies. AI can be terrible in this game. Many kinds of enemies will just stand there and take shots until they die, while others behave in frustrating ways, constantly raising shields or teleporting erratically, so it's sometimes too easy, no challenge at all, and sometimes just irritating and unfair. This doesn't happen throughout the entire game though, but will happen every so often, so this is a hard one to recommend. And finally is another cozy game called Adore. This is kinda cool. It's an action roguelike with monster taming that reminds me of Lost Kingdom, remember that? On the GameCube. Other games do this too, but this evokes those same gameplay beats to me. Instead of attacking, the protagonist can summon up to 4 different creatures, which you can allocate to the face buttons. Each creatures behave differently. Some come in and attack, others stay still and do ranged attacks, others can be mounted on, lots of different things. Progression happens by taking on short missions, which can move the story forward or not. You move around the small dungeons, eradicating every enemy, eventually a boss, and gathering loot. Then go back to town and improve your stuff, buy artifacts, teach your monster new abilities, and rinse and repeat. A simple gameplay loop already, and the main problem here is that the level design is almost non-existing, leading to no incentive to explore, and because of that it feels too basic of a gameplay loop. The moment-to-moment action is cool though, the graphics are great, music is nice too, so it's still enjoyable but could have been better. And that's it guys, remember to check out the Nintendo Switch physical collectors group for a lot more Switch related stuff. Later today or tomorrow I will roll out the first weekly extra game suggestion list. I also focused on Switch physicals this time. This is exclusive to patrons of the channel, $3 and up. This channel is most importantly funded through Patreon, which I invite you to join. And thank you so much to all you generous people who donate out there. And thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.